Humpty, baby, do the Humpty Hump. I just want to say rest in peace to Shock G. He was very talented. It is some disturbing news that is coming out on the internet about him. I came across this video and I said, you guys will want to know what's going on with a real talent, right? So let's react. Make sure you guys like, share, and subscribe here. And let's see what they're saying, what new information they have on.
Do the Humpty Hump. Come on, do the Humpty Hump. Check me out, y'all. Who knows, but Pac wasn't worried about death. He was not scared of death. Neither am I. I might go tonight. I might go tomorrow. I might live another 20 years. God don't bless me. But who knows?
This just in tonight, the hip-hop star Shock G has reportedly died.
Remember Shock G? You think you know how he died. You don't. You remember the nose, the glasses, the funk, the dance, the grin. You remember a man who made the whole world laugh in 1990, shook his hips in a ridiculous disguise, and handed hip-hop one of the silliest, funkiest records it would ever produce. That's the version they play on nostalgia reels. That's the version the tributes keep polishing. That's the version somebody's cousin quotes at the cookout every summer. I'm the one they call Humpty. And everybody laughs, and nobody asks what happened to the man who wrote it.
I Get Around was the time I pulled Pac out of the party, and I said, yo, they got 2 more hits on you. They already had 2 in Oakland, now they got 2 in LA. 4 people are paid to kill you. Take it easy. Take my key, live in my condo while I'm on tour.
But what the documentaries didn't show you, what the interviews skipped, what the obituaries quietly stepped around, is the man underneath the costume, the quiet one, the pianist, the producer who put a skinny kid named Tupac on, and then carried his ghost around for 25 years. The introvert who learned to disappear inside a character, and then, slowly, privately, brilliantly, started disappearing for real. Nobody's told you this version. Not the biopics, not the tribute articles, not the hip-hop podcasts. They told you he overdosed. They didn't tell you what he was running from. They told you he was Humpty Hump. They didn't tell you what it cost him to keep being Humpty Hump long after the joke stopped landing. Because the truth about how Shock G died and why is darker than the funeral program let on. And it starts a long, long time before that Tampa hotel room.
You know what Pac told me? He said, you finish? You don't get it, do you? I don't give a fuck. And walked away. And before he got out of sight, he looked back one last time and went.
Before Humpty, before the nose, before anybody in Oakland knew his name. Gregory Edward Jacobs was born in Brooklyn in August of 1963, a quiet kid in a loud borough. His family bounced. New York, Queens, and eventually down to Tampa, Florida, where the palms swapped out for concrete and the pace slowed enough for a boy to hear himself think. And Greg was a thinker, a reader, a piano kid, the kind of child who'd sit at the keys for hours and forget to eat, chasing a chord he heard once on a Parliament record and couldn't shake, the kind of kid who heard chord changes in elevator music, in church hymns, in the way a screen door slammed on a summer afternoon. School didn't hold him. He dropped out of high school somewhere between East Coast and West, drifted, worked odd gigs, washed dishes, slept on couches, sat in on jam sessions wherever anybody would let him plug in. Eventually he circled back to music the way a magnet finds steel. He finished his GED. He studied music formally. He learned the difference between playing a note and owning it. And by his mid-20s, he'd packed up and landed in Oakland, California, where the funk was still in the water and the Bay was teaching black musicians how to sound like nobody else. You've got to understand who Greg was before the costume. He wasn't the class clown. Friends described him as introspective, almost shy, a man who preferred the producer's chair to the microphone, who'd rather build a beat for somebody else than stand in the light himself. He loved P-Funk. He loved Sly Stone. He loved Stevie Wonder with a scholar's devotion. He studied George Clinton like scripture, the way one man could be ridiculous and revolutionary in the same breath. But Oakland in 1987 didn't have a lane for a quiet pianist with P-Funk dreams. The charts wanted hooks. The streets wanted bravado. Rap was getting harder, faster, colder, and Greg, soft-spoken Greg, with his records and his theories and his shy grin, didn't fit the mold. So he did what quiet, gifted, hurting people have always done when the world won't meet them where they are. He built somebody else to send out in his place. In 1987, Greg linked with a Bay Area drummer named Jimmy Drite. The world would come to know him as Chopmaster Jay, and a Tampa radio DJ named Kenny K. Three men with a wild idea. A hip-hop group that didn't sound like hip-hop, built on live instrumentation, Parliament Funkadelic worship, and the kind of theatrical weirdness nobody was bringing to rap in the late 80s. Costumes, characters, skits on wax. They called it Digital Underground. The first single, Underwater Rhymes, got made because Chopmaster Jay's father co-signed a $10,000 loan to pay for it. Write that down. The entire Digital Underground dream, the whole lineage that eventually touched Tupac. It all started because one man's father said yes to a 10-grand gamble on his son's friends. Remember that detail. It matters later, a lot later. Because the story of how that loan gets remembered, and who gets remembered with it, is one of the ugliest parts of this whole thing. Tommy Boy Records came calling, and in 1989, on the video single for Do What You Like, Shock G walked into the frame wearing a big fake nose, oversized Groucho glasses, and a furry pimp hat. And he introduced the world to Humpty Hump. A whole separate character, a whole separate voice, a whole separate walk. Shock told reporters Humpty was his half-brother, that the nose got burned in a kitchen deep fryer accident at a Burger King in Oakland, and kept the bit going for years. Interviewers fell for it. Fans fell for it. Some of the other rappers on the label fell for it. Then came January of 1990. The Humpty Dance dropped as the second single off Sex Packets, and it didn't climb the charts. It detonated them. Number 11 on the Hot 100, number 7 on R&B, 5 straight weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Rap Singles chart. The album went platinum. The Grammys came calling. A nomination for Best Rap Performance by a duo or group. Overnight, a quiet pianist from Tampa was the funniest, weirdest, most magnetic man in hip-hop. Here's the sleight of hand nobody caught. Shock almost never appeared on stage as both himself and Humpty in the same show. He'd vanish backstage, slap on the nose, and come back out as a whole different person. Voice, cadence, energy, all of it. The thing nobody understood was that the costume wasn't a gimmick. It was protection. The introvert had built an extrovert to send out into the lights, and the extrovert had made them both famous. The disguise was working. Too well. And the kid who showed up to the Digital Underground tour bus in 1990 was about to make it global. His name was Tupac Shakur. 19, broke, hungry, carrying a notebook full of verses nobody had heard, and a chip on his shoulder the size of Oakland. Atron Gregory, DU's manager, brought him on as a roadie and backup dancer, lugging gear, hyping the crowd, watching Shock in the booth, and waiting his turn. Shock saw him immediately, saw the writing, saw the hunger, saw the way the kid could turn a crowd with a look, and he did what mentors do when they actually believe. He put him on. On the 1991 EP, This Is an EP release, Shock gave Tupac his first recorded verse on a song called Same Song. That was the spark. A few months later, Shock co-produced Tupac's entire debut, Tupacalypse Now, including Trapped, the song that introduced Tupac Shakur to the world. Shock played keys. Shock arranged. Shock taught him the difference between a song that lands and a song that lingers. 2 years later came I Get Around. Shock on the beat, Shock on the hook. Shock trading verses with Pac and Money B, a summer smash. Then, So Many Tears in 1995. Shock co-wrote it. Shock co-produced it. Still one of the most devastating records in the Tupac catalog. The man in the fake nose was quietly becoming one of the most important producers in West Coast hip-hop, and almost nobody outside the studio walls knew it. That's the part the documentaries skip. They'll tell you Dr. Dre made Pac. They'll tell you Suge made Pac. They'll barely mention that the first person to believe in Tupac Shakur enough to put studio time behind him was a quiet pianist from Tampa in a rubber nose. And then, September 13th, 1996, Las Vegas. Tupac Shakur, 25 years old, dies from gunshot wounds sustained 6 nights earlier on the Strip. The man Shock G produced, mentored, and helped turn into a global icon was gone. Shock, in later interviews, described carrying a guilt he never fully put down, the sense that he'd been a protector who couldn't protect, a mentor who'd handed a kid to the industry and couldn't pull him back out. He didn't talk about it often. When he did, his voice dropped. The humor went somewhere else. The nose came off. That's one crack. There were others. By the mid-90s, the commercial tide in hip-hop had swung hard. Gangsta rap owned the charts. Death Row and Bad Boy were running the culture. The Parliament Funkadelic theatrics that made Digital Underground feel fresh in 1990 felt like yesterday's costume by 1996. The label stopped pushing. The radio stopped calling. The group kept recording. The Body Hat Syndrome, Who Got the Gravy? The Lost Files. 'Cause a DU party don't stop. But the cultural oxygen was gone. The tours got smaller. The checks got smaller. The room got quieter. And here's where the disguise started eating the man. Shock told later interviewers that he began, in his own words, studying the effects of different substances on his creativity. Not recreationally, intellectually. He treated his own body like a producer treats a mixing board, turning one knob up, another down, chasing a sound nobody else could hear. The problem with that experiment is there's no mastering engineer at the end of it. Just a man, alone, in a room, getting further from himself every session. Every session, he told himself, was research. Every session was actually a disappearing act. By 2003, just being in the studio made him depressed. Think about that. The producer who built I Get Around, the man who wrote So Many Tears, the keyboardist who taught Tupac how to phrase a hook. Walking into the booth, the place that used to be church for him, made him want to leave his own body. You don't come back easy from that. You don't wake up one morning and find the joy again. You find smaller and smaller ways to keep going, and eventually the ways themselves become the problem. The industry didn't notice. When Shock G disappeared from the public eye in the 2000s, nobody ran a missing persons piece. No Rolling Stone cover story on the fall. No NPR retrospective. He'd been Humpty Hump, and Humpty Hump was a 90s bit. Filed, cataloged, and shelved next to Hammer Pants in the culture's attic. Which was almost the point. The disguise had done its job. Then it went out of fashion, and the quiet one had nowhere left to go. He released a solo album, Fear of a Mixed Planet, in 2004. He made a solo documentary, Walk With Me, in 2009. He existed. He functioned. He'd show up on features. He'd call old friends at 3 in the morning with beat ideas. But the machine he'd used to hide was rusted through, and the quieter he got, the louder the other thing got. The 2000s for Shock G were a long, quiet decade the culture didn't see. He'd pop up on a verse. He'd post a rambling, loving Instagram tribute to somebody in the game. He'd play a Digital Underground reunion show when the checks cleared, slip the nose back on one more time, get the crowd laughing one more time, and then disappear again. Back into whatever room he was renting, with whatever he was using that week. People who loved him tried. Money B, on every Digital Underground album with him, the only other constant in the whole DU story, stayed in touch. Chopmaster J reached out when he could. even as business tensions between the old crew curdled into something uglier. Family tried. His father tried. But addiction is a disguise that doesn't come off. And by the late 2000s, Greg was wearing one there was no visible seam on. In early 2021, the Tampa Bay Times would later report Tampa police responded to at least 2 incidents involving him in the months before his death, incidents connected to methamphetamine use. On April 5, 2021, one of those cases was cleared without charges when the reporting party declined to cooperate. 17 days before everything ended. The police knew. The paper trail knew. The people around him knew. The disguise was gone. What was left was a 57-year-old man with a gift nobody was collecting on, and a habit nobody knew how to break. Here's the part the tributes don't quite say out loud. Shock wasn't hiding because he was ashamed of the music. He was hiding because the music industry had a very small box for a black introvert in his 50s with a P-Funk brain and a producer's heart, and the box didn't pay. Humpty was a nostalgia act. The Tupac production credits were footnotes on somebody else's Wikipedia page. The solo records barely charted. The man who helped build one of the most important careers in hip-hop history couldn't get his own phone to ring the way it used to. You want to know what the industry does with a gifted man who stops being profitable? It doesn't attack him. It doesn't even argue with him. It just stops calling. And the silence is louder than any beef, any diss, any headline. Silence is the sound of being erased while you're still alive. Silence is a voicemail that never fills up. Silence is a studio session nobody books. Silence is the thing Shock G had been trying to outrun his whole career, and by 2021, silence had finally caught him. By April of 2021, there was no costume left to put on, no stage to walk out on, no Humpty to send out in his place, just a man in a Tampa hotel room, past checkout. April 22, 2021. A manager notices the room hasn't been vacated. Hours pass the time. The knocks go unanswered. Somebody opens the door. Gregory Edward Jacobs, 57 years old, was found unresponsive. Paramedics came. They did what they could. He was pronounced dead at the scene. His father, Edward Jacobs, confirmed the news to reporters later that day. The quiet dignity of a parent saying goodbye to a child who should have buried him instead. The hip-hop world came apart. Chuck D posted. Big Daddy Kane posted. Questlove posted. DJ Premier, Busta Rhymes, Jermaine Dupri, C-Lo. Every name that had shared a stage or a sample with Shock over 34 years logged on and tried to say something that made sense. The LA Times ran the obit that called him the bridge from P-Funk to Pac. Esquire wrote that Digital Underground could fit wherever you put them. MC Hammer, Ice Cube, Chance the Rapper. The tributes came from every corner of the culture. But under the eulogies, a quieter question started moving. What happened in that room? What killed him? The early rumors pointed everywhere. Fentanyl, a bad batch, a laced something. The internet did what the internet does. Filled the silence with theories, with speculation, with the kind of noise that lets people feel close to a tragedy without actually sitting in it. Family asked for patience. The coroner asked for time. On May 1, 2021, at Allen Temple AME Church in Tampa, the family held a funeral. The Tampa Mass Choir sang Stevie Wonder's As. Money B sat in the front row. Mopreme Shakur flew in. Ray Love flew in. DJ Premier came through. Chuck D streamed in remotely. Atron Gregory, the manager who'd brought Tupac to Shock in 1990, coordinated the service. The room was full of people who had loved him, and full of a question nobody could answer yet. The official cause came weeks later, and it was worse than the rumors. On June 10, 2021, the Hillsborough County Medical Examiner's Office ruled Shock G's death an accidental overdose, the combined toxic effects of fentanyl, methamphetamine, and ethanol in his system. Not one substance. 3. A cocktail that would have killed anybody and had killed thousands in Florida that year alone. Accidental, not intentional, not suicide. An experiment. The same experiment he'd been running on himself for nearly 2 decades. That finally went wrong in the wrong room on the wrong night. And that's the part that hurts because it tells you exactly what the last chapter of his life looked like. It wasn't a dramatic downfall. It wasn't a single cinematic collapse. It was a man who'd been mixing his own body on a mixing board for 20 years, slowly turning knobs, telling himself he knew what he was doing, telling himself he could handle it, telling himself the next session would be the one where he got it right. And one night, the levels clipped, and there was nobody in the room to catch it. The tributes kept coming. The posthumous honors started rolling in. In August of 2021, the city of Oakland declared August 25th, Shock's birthday, Digital Underground Day, a whole city, a whole proclamation, a whole piece of civic history carved out for the group he built. But Chopmaster Jay, the man who'd co-founded Digital Underground, the man whose father had put up the $10,000 that made underwater rhymes possible, the man who'd literally financed the first step of the whole journey, was not invited, not acknowledged in the proclamation, not included in the ceremony. He went to the press about it. He asked the obvious question: how do you celebrate a group and erase one of its founders? The answer, like a lot of answers in this story, was complicated and ugly, and nobody's proudest moment. Old business, old grievances, a band leader gone and a band left behind to sort out who got to hold the legacy. Chopmaster Jay said what he said. Money B kept his peace. The estate stayed quiet. And the man who could have made it right, the quiet pianist in the rubber nose, the only one with the authority to settle it, was in the ground in Tampa, a whole country away from the City Hall podium in Oakland. The legend was safe. The man, finally, was not hidden. And the records started doing the work the obituaries couldn't. The Humpty Dance keeps showing up on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Songs list, number 241, and climbing in the collective memory, on sampling databases that trace its DNA into records by Weird Al, Justin Timberlake, the Spice Girls, and 100 rap tracks that nobody remembers taking the loop. I Get Around stayed in the Tupac canon. So many tears stayed in it deeper. Every time somebody puts on Tupacalypse Now or Me Against the World, Shock G's fingerprints are in the mix, uncredited by the casual listener, unmistakable to anyone who knows. And that's the thing about disguises. You wear one long enough, people stop seeing the face under it. You play one character loud enough, the quieter ones disappear. Greg Jacobs spent 34 years being Humpty Hump, and Humpty Hump kept him safe, kept him fed, kept him in the lights, and also kept him from being seen for what he actually was, which was a brilliant, shy, Brooklyn-born, Tampa-raised, Oakland-forged pianist who loved P-Funk, loved his band, loved the kid named Tupac he put on, and couldn't, in the end, love himself loud enough to put the last disguise down. The industry got what it wanted. It got the nose. It got the dance. It got the 3-minute bit it could loop forever on nostalgia playlists and Super Bowl commercials and bar mitzvah DJ sets. What it didn't take, what it didn't bother to take, was the man, the pianist, the producer, the mentor, the architect of a sound that still echoes in records being made right now, in 2026, by kids who weren't born when Sex Packets dropped. But we can take him now. We can listen past the punchline. We can hear the pianist under the producer, under the band leader, under the character, under the costume. We can say the quiet thing the obituaries didn't say. That Gregory Edward Jacobs was one of the most important musicians of his generation. That he built a band, a sound, and a star, and then spent 20 years being invisible in the house he built. That the drugs didn't kill the genius. The genius was there to the end, making records, producing friends, loving his people. The drugs just finally killed the disguise, and behind the nose, where nobody was looking, there was always a man. We see him now,